Happy holidays. Thank you so very much for listening to This Matters in 2020. What you are about to hear is a rebroadcast of one of our favorite episodes of the year. We hope you enjoyed as much as we had working on this show. We hope you have a safe and happy holiday season, and we look forward to continuing the conversation in 2021. And please consider supporting all the journalism The Star does at thestar.com. Subscribing matters. From the Toronto Star, I'm Rudgy Mudler, and this matters. I would like it on the record. I, for one, welcome our new cyber pig overlords. This past week, celebrity entrepreneur Elon Musk did a presentation for one of his lesser-known companies, Neuralink. This is a company that is working on machines and computers that connect to brains that could potentially have sweeping medical benefits. As part of the presentation, he showed off two pigs, Gertrude and Dorothy, who had been implanted with a prototype version of Neuralink's device that could track their brain activity. The internet dubbed them cyber pigs. While this seems like science fiction, there are many health startups and big companies working on several different types of brain-computer machines. It is a fascinating field that we are in the early days of, and to explain just where we are at chipping out our brains, we are joined by Graeme Moffat. He is a senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, and also the chief scientist and co-founder of System 2 Neurotechnology. He's here to talk about some of the latest news in brain-computer interfaces and technology. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, Graeme, I really want to talk about Elon Musk's recent showcase of Neuralink and what the internet is calling the cyber pigs. But I think we need to start at a much more basic discussion than that. I think, most lay people like me are aware of things like EEGs or electroencephalograph, MRIs, and brain scans. But what are we really talking about when we start discussing sort of this new school of brain-computer interfaces or links?
Well, it's a big field, and it has a number of different branches, of which Neuralink and Elon Musk's new, or I guess it's not that new, but recently revealed update is one part. So brain-machine interfaces have been around for some time, and they've sort of been imagined for longer than that. You can think of in science fiction, whether it's written science fiction or movies, we've had this idea of connecting the human brain to computers and either doing more things with the mind or altering the mind through an interface with a machine for a very, very long time. That's sort of the basis of the Matrix. And, you go back to the Future, Doc Brown has a helmet on with a bunch of interfaces to his brain. So the ideas have been around for a long time, and progress has been incremental. So going all the way back to sort of the discovery of the electrical characteristic of the brain in the latter half of the 19th century, early 20th century, and the experimentation around that, of which Canadian scientists were often leaders. We've been interfacing with the brain in an ad hoc manner for a very long time. So a lot of Canadians will remember the television heritage moment of Dr. Wilder Penfield from Montreal, who, as he stimulated with an electrical current the brain of a woman with epilepsy, she would smell burnt toast, and that's how they identified where the epilepsy was coming from in the brain.
Every time she has a seizure, she smells something burning. Now, if we can provoke that smell by probing the surface of the brain, we'll find the source of the seizures. What is it, Mrs. Gold?
Burnt toast. Dr. Penfield, I can smell burnt toast.
This interfacing with the brain has been around for a while, and we've been making incremental progress for decades now, I'd say. Starting in about the late 70s, early 80s, there were two major innovations. One resulted in what's called deep brain stimulation, which is now implanted stimulators that are used to control tremor in Parkinson's disease. And more recently, they're used to treat and modify severe depression, where it's largely intractable by other means. And the other one is cochlear implants. These are done in Toronto at Sick Kids Hospital and around the world. And this is a way of restoring hearing to someone who's congenitally deaf, especially children, so it allows them to learn language. These are implanted devices that electrically stimulate the neurons that would be connected to the ear in a healthy person and are not connected because of a congenital problem with the inner ear. So this has been around for a while, and we've been making incremental progress. And it's exciting to have Elon Musk in the field because he tends to push things forward in specific ways with a lot of resources. So we're seeing an acceleration, not just as a result of Neuralink, but across the board in an interest in neurotechnology directly interfacing with the brain.
Just to be clear about some of the basics here, Musk actually said this. Basically, all the information in our brain is electrical signals.
All of your senses, your sight, hearing, feeling, pain, These are all electrical signals sent by neurons to your brain. And if you can correct these signals, you can solve everything from memory loss, hearing loss, blindness, paralysis, depression, insomnia, extreme pain, seizures, anxiety, addiction, strokes, brain damage. These can all be solved with an implantable Neuralink.
And so the goal here is to first read, control, and then potentially write to them.
That's right.
Do I got that correct?
Yeah. So you can think of this sort of as a two-pronged problem. There's recording from the brain, so reading, and then stimulating the brain is writing, as an analogy for that. It's true that all of the information in the brain is transmitted through electrical signals. It's a little bit more complicated than the on-off like spikes that were shown in the Neuralink demonstration. There are lots of other things happening, and there are lots of molecular and cellular mechanisms that are driving these things that influence it as much as whether you're stimulating the brain, if not more so. So what Elon said is definitely true. And what they've done at Neuralink is they've taken sort of the state of the art, which is, say, 500 channels of recording and stimulation in the brain, which might get you a few dozen to a few hundred individual neurons, brain cells connected to those. And so you'd be able to record from that many at a time and potentially stimulate that many simultaneously or, in sequence. So the state of the art until recently was about 500 channels, but it required that you connect these brain interfaces that were implanted in the brains of mostly animals, but sometimes in humans, more recently in humans, to a pretty sophisticated electronics system. So you'd need a big computer, you need a big amplifier, you'd need a whole rack of machines, and it would have to be wired. What they've managed to do is connect more than 1,000 channels and make it so that it uses so little power that it can be implanted and run from a battery. And that battery can power all of the electronics in the chip and send the signal wirelessly to a smartphone or to a computer. So the real innovation here is not so much in the neuroscience as it is in the engineering of the devices and the electronics, and also in the implantation. Neurosurgery is hard. And getting electrodes into the brain in the right places without having them go through a blood vessel or, a critical structure that you don't want to hit is very, very difficult. So they've made some real progress on robotic surgery, and they've made real progress on the electronics.
Let's talk about Neuralink and what Elon Musk showed. Now, first off, he said this is a recruiting video.
That's right.
He didn't say this was for investment. They're already sitting on like $160 million, so they're okay. But the super interesting thing here is basically they did want to show off how far they've come with the tech. It seems to me that they've changed how they're potentially will implant it in humans. But the other big thing was that they showed off these cyber pigs. Their names are Gertrude and Dorothy. Gertrude, I believe, had one still in it, and they could show her moving around and her brain spikes. Dorothy, they showed because she had a Neuralink in, and it's now been taken out without any ill effects.
The beeps you're hearing are real-time signals from the Neuralink in Gertrude's head. So this Neuralink connects to neurons that are in her snout. So whenever she snuffles around and touches something with her snout, that sends out neural spikes, which are detected here.
First off, you saw this thing, you're in this field. What did you think, and what do you think of this interesting news that they showed off?
Yeah, it's an impressive rate of progress. So if you look back at the history of the development of tools for neuroscience and of these implanted brain stimulators, it's taken decades usually to get them to a level where you would have confidence that they were safe to implant in a human based on having tested them on a number of animals of increasing size and similarity to humans. So what they showed in the Neuralink demonstration was they brought these pigs out with implanted stimulators with prototype versions of the Neuralink device. And they showed in one pig that they can record from neurons and from more than a few, probably dozens or hundreds at one time with a device. And then in the other pig, they showed that they've put this thing in, and then at some point later, they took it out, and the pig seems to be healthy. And that's a critical demonstration. There are a lot of open questions about what the long-term effects are on that pig or on anyone who has an implanted stimulator, because the brain doesn't like to have things inserted into it. It moves around. People don't think about this, but the brain has a pulse. So it moves around a lot, and it has an immune system, and it tends to attack external devices that are implanted in it, and it causes inflammation, and it can cause all kinds of problems. So knowing that a device can be implanted and taken out and not have any long-term deleterious effects on an animal is critical. I think that's still an open question, but it's a positive sign that they showed this pig that had the device there and then had it removed and seemed to be healthy.
We'll be right back. they said that pigs like to headbutt each other a lot. And there didn't seem to be any ill effects from the Neuralinks butting against each other. So just in case you want to have one of these things and headbutt somebody, you should be okay.
Yeah, well, it's very important to remember that in order for us to really know that these things are safe in the long term for people to have implanted, it's going to take the amount of time that you want to know how long it's safe for. So if we want to know that these things are safe and after 10 years, they don't have any significant damaging effects to someone's brain, it's going to take 10 years to get there. So this is going to be a long-term thing. And that's true for all medical device, especially implanted medical device testing and development. So we're still in the early days. It's going to be years before this gets into humans in a big way, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them show data from an implanted human next year.
Wow. That sounds incredibly fast to me.
Yeah, one of the things that popped out of their presentation, and they got some applause for it, but you have to sort of be in the industry or in the medical device sector to get the significance of it. The Food and Drug Administration in the US, which is the body that regulates all medical devices and drugs and whatnot, has given Neuralink something called breakthrough designation, which is identified as a potential breakthrough device that could have pretty important significance for patients who are suffering from neurological disease. So they're accelerating the process of approvals, and they'll be allowed to test it earlier and, have sort of ongoing updates to their testing with the regulators, which means that it could happen faster than it used to, or than it might have in the past.
Well, and this is the thing. Let's talk about what are the potential therapeutic benefits. I have to say, Musk put a list up that made it sound that this could be a panacea, could fix everything, if these electrical signals cause blindness, deafness. But I think off the top, we are talking about people who have neurological disorders right now that potentially this could help, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's been some controversy around this. This isn't the first time there's been controversy around making these kinds of enormous promises that we might be able to treat important diseases, important neurological diseases, or psychological problems with technology. So there's been controversy going back to the Christopher Reeve Foundation when they promised that maybe someday in the future you'll be able to walk again. But they raised a lot of money on the basis of those promises, and they've sponsored a lot of research. So there's a real trade-off between what they promise and what they can deliver, and getting people's hopes up versus sort of keeping the momentum going on the work that they're trying to do. It's important to take this in a broader context of what we've been dealing with in the therapeutic availability of drugs and devices for neurological disease across the board, I guess you'd say. For decades, we've had almost no new drugs to treat brain diseases and brain disorders. And we've had an enormous number of failures of late-stage drugs in phase 3 clinical trials for things like Alzheimer's disease and depression and big problems that affect a lot of people. And we haven't had a lot of new drugs come along, and we haven't had a lot of new therapeutics come along. So in many respects, I think people are looking to what they're calling bioelectronic medicines, of which brain-machine interfaces are a great example. So rather than trying to treat the brain with drugs, it's how do we get in and interface with the circuits of the brain so that we can modulate those circuits and potentially affect the conditions that are causing people to have significantly decreased quality of life. So one of the ways that you would do that is to harness something called neuroplasticity, which was really characterized by another Canadian, Donald Hebb, who was the chair of the psychology department at McGill for many years. Neuroplasticity, the notion that Hebb brought up, well, the way that he characterized it was neurons that fire together, wire together. So you can, by interfering in a neural circuit, by stimulating it, you can change the rate at which it's firing and change the strength of the connections to other neurons. So modulate the circuits. And that allows you to treat and change some characteristics of the brain that you're interfacing with. This is very, very important because we've actually had some success with brain-machine interfaces, with brain-computer interfaces, with these stimulators that I mentioned earlier for Parkinson's, tremor, and for depression. And that's actually already an industry, deep brain stimulation. So I think it's important. We're still in the early days, and we're maybe a decade off or more from this being widely available to treat these conditions. But it's an important direction to go in for sure.
You mentioned some of the risks. You said that basically we have to wait. If we want these things to be safe for 10 years, we're going to have to watch it for about 10 years. What are the other ones? I can tell you right now, I took a look at this thing and, the battery is the question to me. Like, I don't think I'd want a battery in my head.
I think you're not alone.
What are the other risks about this?
There are some important risks. There are some of the technical risks and the medical risks. Like, what does it mean to have a battery in your head? Do you have to have it sort of removed and replaced and upgraded? What happens when the technology improves? Do you have this thing pulled out and then another one put in? And all of these are sort of questions that remain open. To their credit, Neuralink has done an enormous amount of work on not just the technology, but the techniques for implanting it. So they've worked on neurosurgical robots that can do this very, very fine work and reduce risk of medical error or surgical error or any kind of the deleterious effects. And that's an important part. But it is very much an open question. What does it mean to have a battery in your head? Do you have to take it out at some point and replace it? because batteries have a finite number of cycles that you can recharge them over. Everybody knows that their iPhone starts to lose its ability to hold power after about a year or two. And the same would be true of batteries in your head. So that's an important consideration. The other one is the ethical consideration.
What are the ethics of this? What are the ethics of potentially augmented humans? I mean, where does this take us?
I think this falls into other things like genetic modification that have very similar implications. If some people have access to it and others don't, and they can augment themselves in ways that give them an advantage, it can drive inequality. That's one big consideration. But the potential benefits of treating mental illness and brain disease are probably worth the trade-off of trying to pursue this. The other big ethical considerations, and there are a number, but among them are what happens to someone if you alter their personality or you alter something about them? The question of rights, of individual rights, of free will becomes very important in this case. So I've participated in the OECD's panel on neurotechnology and specifically the commercial development of neurotechnology. There are some leaders in this in Canada at UBC who work on neuroethics, broadly construed. And what we found is that, there's a lot of keen interest. People are thinking very carefully about this. But probably the best work on neuroethics is the actual sci-fi exploration of it. So we can think about these problems all day from a sort of a philosophical or an academic perspective. But imagining what they might do to society and what they might do to interactions between people is actually probably handled best by filmmakers and television shows. There are some great episodes of Black Mirror that have looked at exactly this. What happens if you can change how people perceive and see and think? And that brings us to an important question. If it's a big concern that, technology in our brains, changing our brains could cause us to become different people, and that causes us to have sort of a spasm of ethical concern, we really need to look more broadly at how technology is doing that now just through our sensory systems, the information we're taking in with our eyes and ears. So, Facebook and Instagram use classic reward reinforcement to get you to want likes and to get you to share more and interact more and get you engaged on their platforms. That's classical psychology. That's, mid-20th century Skinner psychology. So technology is...
And they're working on this as well.
And they are too. Yeah, Facebook works on non-invasive stuff. So do some of the video game companies. There are a number of big tech companies working very, very intently on this kind of technology. And, part of it is about how you're going to interact with video games and virtual reality in the future, but part of it will also be about how your behavior and your thinking change as a result. And so it's part of a broader discussion about how technology is changing people's behavior and changing the way that they interact with one another. And I think neurotechnology creates an interesting twist on that, but we still, as a society, have some bigger questions to answer about what we're going to allow technology to do to ourselves, to our kids, and to the way we interact with each other.
Okay, the other reality check that we should have here. Neuralink, they're taking a leap forward. You said it's with the engineering. I think you said it could read about 1,000 neurons.
There's about 1,000 channels, so we don't know how many neurons. They didn't reveal that, but it's probably dozens or hundreds so far, yeah.
But the brain is full of 100 billion neurons, correct?
Yeah, there's about 80 billion neurons in the brain. We're a long way from connecting to a lot of them. Now, you don't have to necessarily connect to a lot of them to get a lot of information out of the brain or put a lot of information into the brain through a brain-machine interface. But you do get some benefit from going up in scale. So there's going to be a trade-off between, how invasive is this thing going to be? We're never going to get to the point where we connect to every single neuron in the brain. There was some discussion in the Neuralink press conference about how you get to deeper structures, because right now you can only get a centimeter or two or so into the surface of the brain, and the brain, goes all the way down to its sort of the center of the brain into the brainstem. Those are hard technical questions, and that seems to be where Neuralink is focusing the most, is how do we increase the bandwidth of our ability to record and stimulate the brain? And I think it's the right focus. So they're on the right track in terms of their engineering priorities, and it's an exciting time to be in the space as a result of that.
So I guess we're still a while off before I can upload some martial arts to myself and be like Neo and say, I know Kung Fu.
I know Kung Fu.
Some of your listeners will have heard of the concept of the singularity, Ray Kurzweil's characterization of a time when we can interface with machines and, technology sort of runs away with its acceleration. We interface with machines and upload ourselves to devices or the cloud or whatever. I think the singularity is still pretty far away. Most neuroscientists do. So we're making important progress. This is important incremental progress. And it's exciting that Elon Musk and his team are in the space. They very clearly have a lot of brilliant people on their team. And as you mentioned, the press conference that they hosted was really about recruiting, about getting people excited about going and working for them. So they're building their team out and they're trying to bring in more talent. And we're making important progress on the technology and the technical aspects of brain-machine interfaces, but we're still a long, long way from really comprehensive ability to interface broadly to be able to send our thoughts through a computer.
Graeme, this has been really, really great for us. I want to thank you so much for your time and sharing your thoughts about this with us.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for the chat.
Graeme Moffat is a senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. He's also the chief scientist and co-founder of System 2 Neurotechnology. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Raju Mudler, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.